Joe Rogan has, I think, appealed to certain audiences, certain right-wing audiences with his anti-vax misinformation, but also with his transphobia. This has been a theme throughout his career, and it's just kind of ramped up more recently because it's become such a wedge issue for Republicans, and they're being fairly aggressive about it. Here he is talking to, who is he speaking with here? Do we know?
It's Mike Baker. He's a former CIA guy.
Great.
Great.
Your typical comedy podcast.
Right. Yeah, I know. What happened to the deep state stuff? He's talking about the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. And he starts off making a point where I'm like, okay, this is not going to be that bad. But look at where he takes it. He uses this opportunity to make a distinction between supporting gay rights and the crazy lefty supporting trans rights, and why that's a little bit out there. But supporting gay rights, that's perfectly acceptable. And he's essentially defending the Don't Say Gay bill and thinks that the framing of calling it Don't Say Gay is very unfair to the substance of the legislation.
I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she was like, I would be down with Republicans if they would just drop all the gay shit. She was like, all that gay stuff, like, leave those fucking gay people alone. Like, it's one of the dumbest aspects of hardcore conservatives.
Yeah,
that they
absolutely.
That they deny gay rights. And
they do it for the same reason they denied the existence of trans people. You moron.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
No,
I think you're probably not alone. I think there's probably a lot of people that feel that way. There's a lot of people that are in the center on whether it's from left-wing issues or right-wing issues. With left-wing issues, maybe it's trans women in sports, or maybe it's gender confirmation. It's like this Don't Say Gay thing in Florida. When I heard that, I was like, what? What are they saying? You can't say gay? Is that really what's going on? It turns out that's not what it is.
Yeah.
It's not what it is at all. What it is ages, it's first through third grade. They're saying you're not supposed to talk about sexual orientation, gender orientation, or sexual proclivity, or what you're interested in.
Yeah.
They said you should just teach math and science and history to little kids.
Just let the toddlers be.
So say if there is a child who has two gay parents, for example, the teacher is barred from having a discussion about that.
Yeah, enforced euphemisms. You got to talk about like birds and bees and like Mother Goose or some shit, and be poetic about it. And like this is just enforced infantilism because of religious fundamentalism.
Yeah, and
like the idea that you have to be this precious about children with sex, and it sucks that schools have to be a place where like the main force maybe, but kids do not get good sex education from their homes, and actually being properly educated in sex. And you can leave this to the experts about the ages on that. I don't have kids. I'm not an expert on this, but the important thing to recognize about sex education for small children is that it helps them understand what is unwanted as well. So it's a protection against child abuse to teach them about this stuff, and keeping them cloistered is frankly closer to grooming than anything that they're talking about.
Right, but and that's an excellent point. But also what this precludes is talking about gay parents in general and sexuality in terms of like maybe a family looks a little bit different for you. And so it further stigmatizes children, but he's downplaying it. Let's hear what else he has to say, and then we can all weigh in a bit more.
Interested in. Yeah. They said you should just teach math and science and history to little kids.
Yeah, just let the toddlers be toddlers, and then you can start ramping up your
pause it for a second. Pause it. I'm sorry. I have a child who's in first grade. He's not a toddler. He comes home talking about a lot of things. Last year, before first grade, in kindergarten, he learned about Abraham Lincoln getting his brains blown out in the theater. I mean, come on. This is ridiculous that these are like, yes, they're very young children. There's ways to tell them. Obviously, they use the word assassinated with Lincoln. Still, it was pretty. I mean, he came home and told me, "Oh, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated." I was like, "Whoa, you're learning that in kindergarten? That's pretty. That's pretty interesting." But I'm happy you're learning it. It's these are not like, I have a 2-year-old too. I don't expect her to know about Abraham Lincoln or kids sexual orientations or things like that, because she's 2 and doesn't even understand the very concept of it. My son does. He knows the difference between boys and girls very much so, I can tell you, whereas my 2-year-old, it doesn't even occur to her.
Also, we don't, as the critical race theory, or rather the anti-critical race theory push has shown, they don't want us to teach history in this country either. So, really, we're kind of down to even fewer subjects. We're like talking about maybe teaching math and science, sort of, because we've gotten rid of all the other ones or just made them like more heavily propagandized. So
yeah, just stick them in front of the TV with Veggie Tales. Why do they need education anyway?
You put a Bible in one hand, and an NRA pamphlet in the other, and just, send them off to math class.
Yeah, and let the priest babysit him. Sorry.
Woo! Keep going.
It's instruction.
And people are opposed to that. But it's like, listen, your teachers are not supposed to be the people that explain gender to a fucking 7-year-old.
Yeah.
It's just,
you have kids,
Again, I'm
Joe.
sorry, man. Like, actually, in certain cases, we need public teachers because the kids have don't have their parents aren't able to do that for them.
And they're going to come to their own conclusions, which like partly is fine, but it's just like he has kids at 7 years old. Does he not understand like basic that they can? This is also just such a lack of respect for the agency and the perceptiveness of children at this age.
And it's because they I just want to say real quick, it's because they can't get away with saying like I just want them to support abstinence only sex education because like that's what the Christian fundamentalists who I'm really speaking for right now want, because we know that that's bad and leads to horrible outcomes. Like the reason you have public school doing this stuff is because it actually is it's a service for folks, and like it'd be nice if all parents were prepared to have full discussions that prepare their kids for the reality of this stuff, but they're not.
Yeah.
Also, and it's also what he's talking about there too now isn't just like sexual orientation in terms of like, typically a cisgender boy is attracted to a cisgender girl and vice versa. He's now talking about like gender, and kids of all ages interact with that sort of thing every single day just by playing with toys that are considered boys' toys, like action figures, or toys that, like, if a boy goes over and plays in the little kitchen set, oh, that's a girl's toy, you'll hear their parents say sometimes. Go play. No, this is something that they experience every day. And I think that's an important thing for teachers to discuss. Well, you know what? It's totally fine for you. And first of all, these toys shouldn't be gendered, first of all. And second of all, it's totally fine for you to play with that or experiment with that toy or that, that doll if you're a boy, if you want to. No problem with that.
But they don't want that. They want those. They want those things naturalized.
Yes, exactly.
Because then it becomes a masculine and a feminine thing too. Like, oh, that's hurting masculinity in the boys and the femininity in the girls, and that's where it all pretty much grows into.
We're being anti-indoctrination when we say that boys should play with blue toys exclusively and girls should play with pink toys exclusively, and anything that deviates from that or acts or questions that at all, that's indoctrination.
Yeah, I mean, you are just being a complete heathen right now, anti-God.
Well, and I mean, I think this is just a fundamental disagreement between the progressive theory of education versus what right wingers pretend their position on education is. That education is about curriculum only learning in the sense that we should be teaching math and history and only facts and only science and that stuff, and everything else is for your parents to teach you, etc. Where it's no, I think we've understood for a long time as a country that school is a place where kids are socialized. They as children learn to understand and exist in a world that is theoretically they should be, if we were in such a segregated country, learning to exist in a world that's more diverse than they would have otherwise experienced if they were experiencing sort of the kind of education system we had when only the wealthiest people could afford to send their kids to a private school. And these people are afraid of something very acutely terrifying to them, that this stuff is just going to become normal. They don't view their own indoctrination as indoctrination. It's just normal, and their fear is that if you teach kids that this stuff is normal, that it's normal to have two mommies, it's normal to have a mommy, or rather a mommy who becomes a daddy, that they won't be as open to the Republican political machine as they would be otherwise. Because they're talking about rather the person he's talking about who would theoretically be interested in Republican politics, if not for the anti-gay stuff, as sort of, anti-gay as just a general, I guess, umbrella of like their bigotry. Like, who is this person? Because ultimately, like, that's all they have, really. It's like, what is those Republicans for, except for like the bigotry with a really thin veil of like pro-business talking points that the Democrats use too. Like, that's really their sole kind of distinction between those two parties for the most part.
Let's finish. I want to hear what he has to say, because he's trying to say one kind of bigotry is okay and another kind is like is not okay, but it's actually not what the Republicans are doing. That's really the crux of it.
Yeah, I think. And this is why it's a problem for people like Dave Rubin and himself, who are basically crypto reactionaries. And often, maybe Joe isn't, but he certainly books guests.
At the very least, he's an idiot.
And who are these teachers, and how do you know what their perspective is? Are they intelligent about it? Are they trying to,
again, this could be an argument against sex education in schools,
to indoctrinate the child to any particular point of view, whether it's pro-transgender or anti-transgender or anti-gay or pro-gay? They shouldn't have any say
pause there
when you're talking.
He's making it. He's making it seem like the pro-transgender and anti-transgender thing is like a kid walks away saying, I'm going to be transgender now, or I'm not going to be transgender now, or the same with I'm going to be gay now based on what I learned in class. That's not what this is at all. That's just not what this is at all. No kid is listening, getting an education about what a trans person is and what like gender dysphoria is, and going, oh, that's me now, unless they already were experiencing those things and just didn't know what it was.
Right. But they want that. They want those instincts, or they want the thought of a child that I might be trans. They want that both suppressed, and they also want it stigmatized. And that's what not talking about it does. But
what they say, though, that's not what they say, though. They're trying to sell to parents that your kid, who was never feeling like they were transgender person, is going to be educated in that class and walk away saying, oh, now I'm trans, I guess.
Right.
A 7-year-old kid. I mean, I feel like that is the job of the parents.
Yeah.
That's the job. I mean,
and you hope the parents are doing it, but
when kids get older, and
again, I just can't get over how much like this guy's success is that he's basically a Republican often, but just like does cool shit, like is cool with drugs and wrestling.
Yeah, and
this is just like Phyllis Schlafly.
Right.
They develop feelings for either the same sex or opposite sex, or they feel like they're in the wrong body. Then these conversations should be had by qualified people that can discuss this from a nuanced perspective and understand what the...
Joe Rogan would only listen to people who are experts in their particular field and have qualifications to comment on them, right? All right, keep going. I just want to get through this, because if he ever actually lands on something, fucking concrete here, then maybe we'll see. But how much left do we have? 20 seconds.
Psychology of a young person who's trying to figure out who they are in the world is. But the idea that this is don't say gay, because you're saying that ages first grade to third grade, that you shouldn't be bringing up these subjects to them. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying, no, I just don't want you grooming my kids for whatever your ideology.
There we go.
There we go. Ideology or there we go. Ideology. I want you to teach them fucking science.
Yeah, there's a responsibility.
There we go. There you go. So that's just Republican talking points. Garbage. Just because you have a roid gut and you were on Fear Factor doesn't actually mean that you are in any way distinguishable in terms of the perspective that you're providing for people. Like, he's muddying the waters about what this is. One, he starts off this diatribe. Again, I just want to point this out, saying it's really dumb for Republicans to focus on the anti-gay shit. But actually, what they're implementing in Florida is quite reasonable, because it makes sure that your kids are not indoctrinated and you're not being groomed to be trans. And so then what audience are you speaking to there? That's clear. That's clear. And there's really no difference here. Bigotry is bigotry. And Rogan, with his consistent anti-trans commentary, is the one that is denying science. I've said this before on the show. There have been intersex people. There have been non-binary people throughout history. they have just been suppressed. And there is science that backs that up and shows biology that is the case. And he is the one who is denying the science. Rogan would never deny science, right? I mean, like, that is his MO. So it's just...
I think...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, I think for Rogan, like, because he doesn't see himself as on the religious side of the argument, same with like a Bill Maher, that he thinks like, religion is a big source of like bigotry, especially anti-gay bigotry. You talk about the Westboro Baptist Church, and where it's just like, Joe Rogan's form of bigotry just seems way more like pervasive in our society, because it's just like typical like juvenile like American teen boy masculinity bigotry. It's like, well, he just probably thinks that like being gay is icky, like the idea of kissing another man is icky, the idea of like and these people's minds of accidentally sleeping with a guy because you think they're attractive because they're trans, because it's actually a trans woman and they're a woman, is like it's just disgusting to them. And instead of being able to like deal with their own neuroses, it just becomes like, well, children don't need to know this, because if children learn at an early age that it's normal, then they won't be as grossed out by it as like a 50-year-old man like Joe Rogan is.
Right. I want people to really obviously that was, for a lot of people, I think it was pretty clear when he said grooming where this was going. But I also want to sort of point out that this is a trend right now. The use of that word, you see it way more now than you ever saw before, especially in right-wing circles. It's because they've pinned down something that they think really speaks to the masses. And you know what? I think they're right. I think there are people who are now more in tune to the idea that this stuff could be true, because people have been brainwashed by QAnon. Now, really remember, this is the basis of QAnon. Yeah. This is the basis of these right-wing conspiracy theories. But then on a more mainstream level, it also speaks to like the Jeff Epstein stuff. And that also really warped people's minds into thinking, oh, now this is something that's happening everywhere. And I remember, take it back to Pizzagate even, where there was literally a guy who showed up with a rifle at a pizza place in DC looking for these child sex slaves in a basement that didn't exist. I mean, really understand what's going on here. And it's that the right is basically weaponizing a very real issue with, children being sexually abused, and they're taking it and turning it, and they've figured out that this is the way to win this culture war here. This is the way to win the culture war. The religious stuff, the Christian, what about the children? That wasn't working anymore. What about the children doesn't work, but Save the Children does. And that's what they're honing in on here, and you're going to see it more and more. And if you sit back and just think, oh, it's just a random culture war thing here, that's what they're going for. I don't think that kids at this age, it should be 1 grade older that they learn about this stuff. Just wait, because they're going to come after the thing that you're into, or and
CRT is this. CRT is this. All of this, Save the Josh Hawley's trying to capitalize on this as well. Your children are not safe outside of the home. That's why women have got to go back in the home. And that's why the schools are this hellscape where they're going to be taught all these things that deviate from the norm. It's a huge part of misogyny. And also it's just like tapping into this very visceral thing that is child abuse, and using very cynically so, using the intense emotions that evokes in order to implement fascism. That's what.
Yeah, I think there's a long history. Well said, Emma. There's a long history of those kinds of moral and sex panics in this country related to people's children, related to people, especially as it relates to gay men being sexual predators in the minds of a lot of Americans, especially relates to the idea of like, well, you can't leave your kids with babysitters because, you should be at home taking care of them in a nuclear family scenario. White flight from the suburb to the suburbs was about like raising your kids in a more safe environment. And we've just, I think, gotten to the point where there are just more and more mainstream gay people. There are more and more mainstream trans people. We've more or less, especially in our just mass media, accepted LGBTQ people as a part of our society that need to be respected and protected. That now they have to do what all cowards do, as the old saying is, like, cowards love hiding behind rules and children. And so they hide behind the children. They hide behind like what it technically says in the Constitution about gun laws, because they know that just like that one person who Joe Rogan is theoretically, his friend who would be pro-Republican if not for the anti-gay shit, like they know that like whatever bigotry they have or inside of them that they would love to express is just not socially acceptable anymore. And that's what the canceling arguments to, that we have to go back to a world where it's socially acceptable to be vocally a bigot and no one can do anything about it, sort of in terms of social stigmas towards you. We have to go to a world where the only kind of affirmative action that anyone is allowed to have is like if they're born rich and have a legacy at Harvard. And we have to go back to a world where like children are the wards of their parents 100%, and there's nothing that any outside force can do to like interrupt that nuclear family life. And none of that stuff ever really existed, but in their minds, like there is an imagined past where they would have been allowed to be like a bigot but still respected.
No.
And there's no easier way to demean the person who you're opposing than literally just call him a pedophile. You got nothing else, just call him a pedo. That's it.
I prefer just using the more common colloquialism, libertarian, which ultimately just tends to mean the same thing.
There you go.
It's put it in scare quotes.
No has a good comment in the chat. Says this line of grooming propaganda term was quite effective in the UK as it became an anti-Muslim term for trafficking and sex abuse of children because of some highly publicized cases. Yeah, I do remember that.
And they're using this too with TERFs.
So yeah, this has a long lineage. We should maybe somebody should write a long piece on it.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of stuff about the idea of like the white slavery moral panic back in the 60s, no, not really the 60s, but like the 70s and 80s. The idea that like people were kidnapping white kids from the suburbs and like selling them into human trafficking, specifically like these kinds of like LGBT like specter groups, like gay men or what you call it, trans people. That's why, and that's why there are so many Lifetime movies.
Also, the movie Taken is about Muslim people doing that, by the way. Yeah. But that's just another thing. But, anyway, keep going.
Every Lifetime movie you see is about your like suburban kid being kidnapped, not necessarily by gay or trans people, but that's just like the anxiety that they're tapping into, that they're going to, that your poor baby Braden is going to be like, like their kindergarten teacher is going to be a trans woman and then like spirit the kid away to, I don't know, like the global south to make them a communist revolutionary.